Today, I'm going to be talking about why you procrastinate even when you really want to get things done. So, have you ever had something that you genuinely wanted to do? Something important, something that could make a real difference to your life, your career, your health, your relationships, or your future. And yet, when it was time to actually do it, you found yourself doing almost anything else. You checked email, you made another coffee, you scrolled through your phone, you suddenly decide that the kitchen needs cleaning. You research something completely unrelated, you tell yourself that you'll start after lunch, and then after lunch becomes tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes next week. The strange thing is that you actually may have wanted to do the thing. You may have even been excited about it. So why don't you do it? Most people explain procrastination as a discipline problem, a motivation problem, or a time management problem. They tell themselves that they're lazy, undisciplined, distracted, or simply not committed enough. But there is another explanation that I think is far more useful. Procrastination is often a stress response problem. And understanding that can completely change the way you deal with it. The problem is not always the task. Let's start with something important. You don't you do not necessarily procrastinate because you do not want the outcome. In fact, sometimes you procrastinate most on the things you care about the most. Why? Because important things carry emotional weight. Starting a business matters. Changing careers matters. Writing the book matters. Having the difficult conversation matters. Getting fit and healthy matters. Losing weight matters. Applying for the new job matters. Starting a project matters. Putting your work out into the world matters. And whenever something matters, there's usually some degree of uncertainty attached to it. What if I fail? What if I make the wrong decision? What if people judge me? What if I discover that I'm not as capable as I thought? What if I start and cannot finish? What if this actually changes my life? Your conscious mind may be saying, I really want to do this. But another part of your brain and nervous system may be saying, this feels threatening. And when the nervous system detects a threat, it does not always produce obvious panic. Sometimes it produces avoidance. Sometimes it produces distraction. Sometimes it produces perfectionism. Sometimes it produces overthinking. And more often than not, sometimes it produces procrastination. So procrastination can be your brain trying to protect you. So this is where we need to change the way we think about procrastination. Your brain is constantly trying to predict what is going to happen next and determine whether you are safe. When you approach something that feels uncertain, difficult, exposing, or emotionally uncomfortable, your nervous system can interpret that situation as a form of threat. It does not have to be a physical danger. It can be a psychological threat. It can be the threat of failure, the threat of rejection, the threat of embarrassment, the threat of losing control, the threat of not being good enough, or simply the threat of leaving what is familiar. And here is the important part. Your nervous system does not necessarily care that the task is good for you. It cares about whether the situation feels safe enough for you to approach it. So you can have a perfectly rational goal and still find yourself avoiding it. Your conscious mind wants growth. Your automatic system may want safety. And when these two systems disagree, the automatic system often wins. There's another reason procrastination becomes such a powerful pattern. It works, at least temporarily. Imagine you sit down to start an important project. You feel a little tension, you feel uncertain, you notice the thought, I don't really know where to start. Then another thought appears, I should probably do some more research first. So you open your browser, you spend 20 minutes researching. You feel better. The uncomfortable feeling has reduced. That is important. Your brain has just learnt something. Avoiding the task made me feel better. The next time you face a similar situation, the brain remembers that pattern. Trigger, discomfort, avoidance, relief. And the pattern becomes easier to repeat. So this is how procrastination can become conditioned. You're not simply choosing not to do something, you are reinforcing a learned response to discomfort. And this is why procrastination often gets worse under stress. When you are already stressed, your capacity to tolerate additional uncertainty and discomfort can be reduced. Your window of tolerance becomes narrower. Something that would normally feel manageable can suddenly feel overwhelming. A task that could take 30 minutes can feel enormous. A simple decision can become something you overthink for hours. A small email can feel strangely difficult to send. A project can feel so large that you don't even know where to begin. And instead of moving toward the thing, you move away from it. This is why simply telling yourself to be more disciplined often does not solve the problem. You're trying to use more willpower against a system that is already trying to protect you from discomfort. But there is another layer, the meaning you attach to the task. The task itself may not be the real problem. The meaning you give the task may be. Consider this difference between two different tasks or meanings attributed to a task. I need to write this presentation, and this presentation has to be brilliant because people are going to judge me. Or this presentation has to be brilliant because my job counts on it. Those are technically the same task, but they create very different internal experiences. Or consider this, I need to apply for this job versus if I apply and get rejected, it will prove that I'm not good enough. Again, the task is exactly the same, but the meaning attributed is different. And meaning influences emotion. Emotion influences your physiological state. Your physiological state influences your behavior. So what looks like procrastination on the outside may actually be the final part of a much bigger internal process. Something happens, you interpret it, the interpretation creates a response, your body changes state, and then you behave accordingly. Sometimes the behavior is avoidance, which in this case is procrastination. So I want you to think about procrastination as a loop. Something demands action. You perceive uncertainty, difficulty, exposure, or threat. Your brain gives the situation a meaning. Your body responds. You experience discomfort. You move away from the discomfort. You experience temporary relief, and that relief reinforces the avoidance. The next time you face the situation, so exactly the same situation or very similar, the pattern is already there. And eventually you may start telling yourself a completely different story. I'm a procrastinator. I lack discipline. I never finish anything. I'm just not motivated. But those statements can become another part of the problem because now you're not only avoiding a task, you're building an identity around avoidance. So what can you actually do? The first thing I want you to do is stop doing is fighting yourself. The next time you catch yourself procrastinating, do not immediately say, "Why am I so lazy?" Instead, become curious. Ask yourself, what am I actually avoiding right now? Not the task, the feeling. What feeling are you trying not to experience? Is it uncertainty, fear of failure, fear of being judged, boredom, confusion, perfectionism, feeling overwhelmed, fear that you will not be able to finish? Or perhaps the task represents something much bigger about who you believe you are. This question, what am I actually avoiding right now, can change your relationship with procrastination. The next time you catch yourself avoiding something important, stop and ask yourself 3 questions. I call this the 3-question reset. So question 1, what am I feeling? Don't analyze it for 10 minutes. Simply identify what is happening. I feel anxious. I feel overwhelmed. I feel uncertain. I feel bored. I feel exposed. I feel pressure. Naming what is happening helps move you from simply being inside the reaction to observing it. Question 2, what meaning am I giving to this? Then ask yourself, what am I telling myself this task means? Perhaps you're telling yourself that you have to get it perfect. Perhaps you believe that failure will say something about your self-worth. Perhaps you believe that you have to know exactly what you're doing before you begin. Perhaps you have turned a 30-minute task into a judgment about your entire future. So look for the story or narrative behind the task. Question 3, what is the smallest action I can deliberately take right now? Not how do I finish this? Not how do I completely change my life? How do I reinvent my whole self? How do I transform myself? Just ask, what is the next deliberate action? Could be opening the document, writing the first sentence or even paragraph, send the first email, make the first call, put on your shoes, write down the first idea, take the very first step. The objective is not to complete everything. The objective is to interrupt the avoidance pattern and prove to your brain that you can move toward discomfort rather than automatically moving away from it. So you're training your brain and nervous system a completely different response. So this is the bigger idea I want you to take away. Every time you respond differently to a familiar trigger, you're doing more than completing a task. You are training yourself. You're teaching your brain and nervous system, I can experience uncertainty and still act. I can feel uncomfortable and still move forward. I do not have to wait until I feel perfectly ready. I can choose my response. And that is fundamentally different from simply trying to become more productive. Because the objective is not to become a machine that gets more things done. The objective is to become a person who can deliberately choose how they respond when life becomes difficult. And that is true self-mastery, or what we call, in our vernacular, becoming mind strong. And this applies far beyond procrastination. Think about how many areas of your life might be affected by the same pattern. You know you should exercise, but you avoid starting. You know you need to have the conversation, but you keep putting it off. You know you should apply for the opportunity, but you keep finding reasons to wait. You want to start that business, but you keep researching instead of acting. You want to change careers, but you remain in the familiar situation. You want to write that book, but you keep preparing to write. You want to make changes in your life, but every time you approach uncertainty, you return to what feels familiar. The problem is not always that you do not know what to do. Sometimes the problem is that your automatic system has become very good at keeping you inside what feels safe and familiar. And if that is the case, more information is not necessarily the answer. You need to learn how to change your response to stress, uncertainty, and discomfort. So your practice for today, because I like to keep things practical, think of one thing you've been procrastinating on. Choose something that matters, but do not choose the biggest problem in your life. Then write down 4 things. First, what am I avoiding? So you want to dig right down to find out the very reason why you're avoiding this. Second, what am I feeling when I think about doing it? So you want to go internal and feel what's happening. Do you feel some tightness, your jaw a little bit tighter? What are you feeling? Maybe you feel a little bit overwhelmed, maybe a little bit stressed. What is it you're feeling? Then third, what meaning or story am I attaching to it? And lastly, what is one small action I can take this very day despite that feeling? And this is the most important part. Take that action. So do not wait until you feel motivated. Do not wait until you feel completely confident. Do not wait until the discomfort disappears. Take the action while the discomfort is still there, because that is how you begin changing the pattern. So the big lesson here is procrastination is not something you should simply excuse, but neither is it something you should simply beat yourself up about. It is just information. It may be telling you that something about the situation is activating a stress response. And once you can recognize that, you have another choice. You can regulate your response. You can examine the meaning you are giving the situation. You can challenge the story. And you can choose a completely different action. That is how you begin moving from automatic or default behavior to deliberate behavior. And that is one of the foundations of mental fitness and becoming mind strong. Because a strong mind is not a mind that never experiences stress, fear, or uncertainty. A strong mind, or what we call mind strong, is one that can experience those things without automatically allowing them to decide what happens next. Because understanding why you procrastinate is useful, but learning how to change what happens next is where the real transformation begins. So the next time you find yourself saying, I know I need to do this, why can't I just get started? Stop, take a breath, or 2 or 3, whatever you need. Get curious about what is happening beneath the behavior, and then ask yourself, what am I feeling? What meaning am I giving this? What is the next deliberate action I can take? And then take that step. You do not have to feel ready. You just have to learn that you can act even when you do not. And that is how you begin to take back control. So if this resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe to our channel for further practical ideas on self-mastery, mental fitness, how to become mind strong, about human potential, and learning how to live more deliberately, to live your life more passionately, purposefully, and without regret. Thank you.